I can tell you that as the conflict in the Middle East unfolds and threatens to intensify, disruptions in the maritime trade through the Strait of Hormuz risks creating a ripple effect impacting humanitarian needs and agricultural production in the coming months.
And that shipping disruption has prompted the UN to create a task force to safeguard shipments through the Strait of Hormuz. Iran has shut the flow of oil, food, medicine, and fertilizer for over a month. Now, the U.S.-Israel war with Iran has hit Lebanon and Gulf countries and disrupted major land, sea, and air supply chains globally. Since the closure of airspaces and Iran's near total blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, fuel prices have skyrocketed almost everywhere. Now, the logistical deadlock in the Middle East is choking global supply lines and is even threatening the supply of critical medical supplies. Ilyas Avcı reports.
In Sudan, the fight against cholera has always been a race against time. But that race is now being lost in a logistical bottleneck thousands of kilometers away. Emergency stockpiles intended for the most vulnerable regions are currently stocked in Dubai. A combination of airspace closures and maritime disruptions linked to the ongoing conflict in the region has paralyzed the humanitarian corridor.
The supply chain across the Middle East is under severe immediate pressure. What we're seeing right now is not one disruption, but it's a systemic stress on the entire humanitarian supply chain. All our supplies take longer, the supplier take longer. So in essence, what we are facing is an expensive supply chain where it's less aid for more dollars.
The rainy season is also close, which raises the risk of waterborne diseases. Without the ability to set up rapid response centers and chlorine to treat sewage and drinking water, aid workers fear they'll be unable to contain the spread once it begins.
Having a kit to build what we call cholera treatment center, so it's kind of a field hospital. And so the intervention is at a community level, it's not an individual cholera kit. Of course, we have commodities then to treat our patients. We have oral radiotherapy solution, which is ironically a very simple way to treat cholera. Dreadful disease, but when you have cholera and you have this very debilitating diarrhea, what you need to get quickly is radiation.
For countries like Sudan and Chad, there is no domestic manufacturing for these supplies. They're entirely dependent on a global chain that is now fractured.
Will have dramatic consequences because we're talking, explosive disease. If you don't have the time, the resources to control it in a matter of days or even hours, you would have an extreme contamination and potentially explosive outbreaks.
The Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention says that the continent experienced the worst cholera outbreak in 25 years last year. And even though the tools to stop cholera are simple and inexpensive, the cost of delivering them has nearly doubled, putting more lives at risk. Ilyas Avcı, Africa Matters.
Aid agencies say the shipping disruptions in the Persian Gulf have hiked the cost of aid delivery by up to 70%. Over 130 million Africans rely on aid mainly due to conflict and climate shocks. Now, cargo ships carrying humanitarian aid have been rerouted around the Cape of Good Hope, but that's added up to 30 days to the voyage. The World Food Programme says 70,000 tons of its food supplies are either stuck en route or in ports. The shift from maritime to air transport has raised air freight costs by over 50% on some routes, stretching aid budgets already hit by funding cuts. And land transport costs have gone up by over 20% due to border delays and higher fuel prices.
But we are impacted by the ripple effect that the ships in the Horn have on supply chains globally. Ports upstream are getting congested because vessels can't leave ports, then vessels can't berth into those ports, containers don't get offloaded, so containers remain stuck, and then containers are not available where we need them. This is how the global supply chain is being affected by this conflict.
Let's hear more from Ndubisi Nokolo, Managing Partner and Chief Executive of Next Year SPD. They are an international consulting firm focused on security and peace and development across Nigeria and the broader African region. He is in Birmingham in the United Kingdom. Thank you for joining us here on Africa Matters. A lot has been happening since the war on Iran began. But how has the near closure of the Strait of Hormuz affected the continent?
Thank you, Brendan, for inviting me. I mean, a couple of things. Africa, with a population of nearly 1.4 billion, of which about 460 million of them live in extreme poverty, should be the continent that is mostly affected. Reasons being that with this number of people who depends on handouts from states, it's important to know that it will affect them. First, fertilizer, which most of these African countries will be using, 2/3 of this fertilizer pass through this region. So Africa is really suffering with the closure. Secondly, some of these African countries struggle with, struggle under energy poverty, and with gas and petrol being an issue, it's been affected by the closure. So I mean, Africa is really suffering. But if you look at it from the other perspective, you might be thinking, yeah, there are countries that are maybe making some money out of the closure, countries like maybe Nigeria because they're oil producing. But if you look at it from an expanded perspective, you will know that no, there are even people suffering more than what the state is getting. So Africa is mostly affected by the closure of the Strait of Hormuz.
So what can African governments do to, help their citizens who are feeling the ripple effects of the war?
First is to look inwards. I think that's the most important thing. Look inwards and start looking at most of their poor policies. How can they start doing something that could help the poor? I mean, a lot of people might be thinking, could it be palliative? More than that, but looking at those state institutions that could help people out where we are. You could look at mass transportation. You could look at putting more money around health and things that could support the most vulnerable people within the communities. I mean, that might be how to go about this for now.
Right, and it's good when we're beginning this conversation, you talked about Nigeria being one of the countries in the continent benefiting from, what is happening when it comes to export of crude oil. So then just a follow-up question would be, what are some of the African, are some African countries benefiting from the closure of the Strait of Hormuz?
Of course, in every war, there are losers and gainers, right? So countries like Nigeria, Angola, might gain from a short-term perspective, right? But if you look at it when it involves the trickling down effect of this, you will know that in the long run, they are not really getting. But for instance, petrol in Nigeria moved from about 870 naira per liter to nearly 1,500. So for an average Nigerian, this is not good, right? So that's on one part. Then if you look at things like fertilizer that the poor farmers are going to use, the prices has gone up. So, but again, the businesses that are into fertilizer like Dangote fertilizer and OCP in Morocco, you might be thinking that, okay, it's time to make big businesses but the issue remains that their production is not even enough to cover what the African region needs. Right. So if you look at it from a long term, I don't think this is good for Africa.
Right, and you talk about booming business. Let's have a look at countries like Kenya, South Africa, Mauritius. Their ports have recorded high records of, business in terms of cargo ships going there. Are we likely to see this continue even after the war is over?
It can only continue if we have an effective state, right? If African states can become more effective in a lot of things, especially in trying to sustain what they've gained now, bring in more technology, then it will continue. Otherwise, it will be a flash in the pan, because once it stops, the bigger ports in Indonesia, the bigger ports in Malaysia will definitely come up and still take the shine. But if African countries can be a bit creative, a bit dynamic, it might be time to say, okay, these are falling on our laps. We will take it to the next level. We'll get our ports to expand. We'll get our ports to become the hubs, right? And then they can take the opportunity. But if they think that it will continue based on the technology they have, no, that's not going to happen. Right. Because, for instance, the ports in Nigeria, you cannot even think that it can handle congestion like what we have now. So that's what the situation is. But they need to do more than thinking that it will continue after the conflict.
All right. And then just to shift our focus to the humanitarian aid sector. And, aid agencies say it's more expensive and it's taking longer to deliver emergency aid. So what can be done at this point, as seeing what is happening within the humanitarian sector to diversify the supply routes?
Aside from the supply route, it's not to start looking inward, especially with regards to pharmaceutical drugs and other things that could be manufactured. Africa should start looking inward. The international politics is changing. We can't continue to rely on aid from other countries or the other continent. It might be time to start looking at those things that we really need as a people, from drugs to food and all that. But in the short run now, might be to look at how we could look at those advantages that we have. What are the networks that we can use? For instance, if we can say that Kenya, maybe Kenya, South Africa, the countries with good port facilities, instead of going round the route, is there any way to connect with these African ports together and see how to do more of an intercontinent transportation? Have those goods go through within some African countries. For instance, if it comes to Kenya, how can you link Kenya up to Chad and to Nigeria? Comes to South Africa, how can you move from South Africa to Namibia, Zambia, Zimbabwe? Within that route, it might be a way. And this might be another way to start developing our internal road networks, like you have in Europe.
All right. And it's good, when we began the conversation, you talked about, you explained it very well, when it comes to governments, sort of like what they can do, African governments, what they can do to help their citizens who are feeling the ripple effects of the war. But let's look at it in terms of the humanitarian sector. What can the governments do to cushion the impact, of the war, the Iran war, and respond to health emergencies?
Like I said, this is where you need to get the state institutions to be more effective, more efficient, more dynamic, and more responsive. So, for instance, countries that have some proposed policies, it might be now to start activating your option A, option B, option C. What is it that you can do at each point in time? Like I said, it should not just be palliative where you share rice and those kind of things. What are the other things that you can do? You might look at a lot of restructuring, which might include states or countries where people are paying so much for transportation. Is it likely that you can cut down the number of days that people go to work? How can you start conserving energy, right? These are the kind of things that you look at from a holistic perspective and see what gains that you can make. So what are the things that you can cut off and move it to those things that could actually benefit the people?
Right. Countries
need to be very dynamic and think from a holistic perspective. I mean, that might be what to do in a short run until the situation normalizes.
All right. Ndubuisu Nwokolo, thank you for your time and thank you for talking to us here on Africa Matters. He's a managing partner and chief executive of Next Year SPD. Well, the Iran war is also hitting South Africans at the fuel pump. Price hikes follow global benchmarks that have risen well above $100 a barrel. Is the highest single fuel jump in the country's history. And as Thuso Khumalo reports from Johannesburg, citizens say they are frustrated and worried.
The ripple effects of the Iran war that's taking place over 7,000 kilometers away from South Africa is being felt here. The petrol price has increased by 18 US cents per litre, while diesel made a 43 cents jump per litre on Wednesday. Citizens relying on paraffin for cooking are the hardest hit, as they are now paying 69 cents more. For motorists, it's devastating news.
I'm scared about the future. I won't survive if it's going to be like this. Even at work, I'm scared maybe they're going to close the company. Yeah, we're scared. Everyone's scared.
The transportation sector, including e-hailing and food deliveries, are bracing themselves for a bumpy road. Many shops have also hiked basic food prices in line with fuel increases. The fuel increase coincides with an 8% rise in electricity prices.
Everything it means is going up, the bread and a lot of things. And you can't stay without eating. You have to eat, we have to wake up, you have to wash your clothing. They need soap and everything.
Labor unions are worried that the fuel hike could lead to higher operational costs, triggering job losses in a country where 1 in 3 South Africans is unemployed. To cushion the blow, the government has announced a temporary reduction in fuel tax.
It's not going to be an easy task. It's a challenge South Africans must understand. It's not of our own choosing. These costs are imposed to us by others who are fighting and preventing and therefore costing this oil, not South Africans. We're not fighting with anybody.
South Africa imports most of its refined fuel. So, how sustainable is this cushion? Minister Kotongwana says the relief will cost the government more than $350 million a month and can only be sustained for up to 3 months. With Operation Epic Fury showing no signs of de-escalating, South Africans are bracing for the West. Thuso Khumalo, Africa Matters, Johannesburg, South Africa.
And now to Kenya, which is the world's third largest exporter of cut flowers. The conflict in the Middle East is even withering its floriculture industry. It's losing millions of dollars because of supply chain disruptions that have also driven up freight costs. Rahul Radhakrishnan has more.
Where flowers bloom, so does hope. A now popular adage often attributed to a former U.S. First Lady. But the U.S. and Israel's ongoing war on Iran is threatening to wilt Kenya's floriculture sector, with weekly losses exceeding $1 million.
The buyers whom we sell to are not making orders. So by and large, if I will tell you, in the last 3 weeks, we have lost about $4.2 million worth of flowers. Probably around 2.1 is attributed to lack of flights or movement of that. And the other one is actually because of the delays and the other accompanying losses that go with that. That is huge for a growing market like that.
At Isinya Flower Farms, around 50 kilometers south of Nairobi, the impact is already being felt.
Only few freights are operating. Mainly the Middle East carriers are completely stopped. And the European carriers, they are looking at $5 per kilo, which is 2 times than the normal rates. With that rates and the current market situation, growers are not able to export. It's not viable paying $5 per kilo and exporting the flowers.
Viable options are shrinking fast. Nearly 50% of these stems meant for export are being discarded due to the war some 7,000 kilometers away. Growers warn that if the war drags on, the sector, only just recovering from the COVID-19 pandemic, could collapse. The Kenya Flower Council is now trying to lobby the Kenyan government to introduce direct cargo flights to its main market in Europe and open alternative markets. If not, they say, job losses will hit hard in a sector that employs nearly 500,000 Kenyans. Rahul Radhakrishnan, Africa Matters.
To Nigeria's central city of Jos now, where protecting the community has for decades been done by men. But this long-held tradition is now changing. An all-female group has now taken up the task using faith and the whip, as Zamali Tule reports.
Jos looks like an ordinary Nigerian city by day. And these days, the nights feel safer in this community thanks to a group of unlikely allies. These women are part of a group of 20 Muslim and Christian vigilantes who patrol every night from 9 p.m. to 1 a.m., confronting drug dealers, thieves, and sometimes armed teenagers.
If our children can work together to do crime and they can work together to take drugs, we too can work together to see that people maintain peace in our community.
Armed with a whip and identification card, they carry out night patrols on the streets of their troubled neighborhood. For years, the work of protecting the community belonged to men, led by the community's commander, known as Big Tarzan. But when he died 4 years ago, his group dissolved, so the women decided to take charge.
I have passion for it. I really love where I come from. I love this village. I wouldn't want to see anything that is happening in this village.
But the job has not been without risks. A member of the group was injured during a confrontation with teenagers at a local hotel.
A threat was sent to me because we addressed a woman, you should close before 12. And the next thing they were telling me that they will look for me and they will not see me. So, but I had to report the matter. So they talked with her from the community and we're having a better understanding with her now.
Despite being ill-equipped and having no government funding, they rely on their experience and what their leader calls wisdom from God to handle volatile situations and tackle crime.
I can tell you that with our love and support, it has reduced. Even the taking of drugs have reduced. Even all these picking pockets, small picking pockets, stealing here and there, has drastically reduced in this community.
To these women, safety does not come through the barrel of the gun, but through dialogue, determination, and unity that transcends religion. Zamalu Tuli, Africa Matters.
And finally, we head to the Democratic Republic of the Congo, where the national football team, the Leopards, have secured a spot in this year's World Cup. It's their first qualification in more than 5 decades. The victory is being seen as a unifying moment for the country, which is facing war in the East, but bringing pride and hope to millions. Prosper Heringorora reports.
For many Congolese, this qualification symbolizes not only a victory, but a milestone in Congolese football history, because the last time Democratic Republic of Congo participated in the final phase of the World Cup in 1974 in Western Germany during the Cold War. And the country's name that time was Zaire.
As a Congolese, I'm over the moon. My friends and I slept in a state of joy. Our players played very well, even though many of our goals were disallowed. We are happy to have qualified for the World Cup.
We are going to go far in the World Cup because we have come a long way. I'm hopeful that we can even reach the final of this World Cup.
Congolese authorities have announced that this 1st April will be a public holiday in order to celebrate the qualification of national team of Democratic Republic of Congo, Leopard, in the upcoming World Cup in America, Canada, and Mexico. This year, Congolese flags will be raised and national anthem will be sung to demonstrate that DRC, according to many analysts, is claiming its greatness among African nations in terms of football.
That's our show this week. Share your thoughts about how the Iran war is disrupting your daily life, or any other stories from the continent that you'd like to see covered. You can leave your comments on our Africa Matters YouTube page or on X. Thanks for watching, and it's goodbye from me, Brenda Zeda Radido.